So we will be sharing that with them afterwards. Do turn off your cameras if you're not happy to be recorded. We've got 2 speakers, first of all, then a Q&A session, and then an update about Stroud Green. And then we'll go into breakout rooms where neighbours can discuss what they've heard from our speakers and talk about how to get involved. If you want to ask a question of one of our speakers, we've created Ask a Question in the chat option. So that's at the bottom panel. If we don't manage to answer all your questions tonight, we'll follow up with an email after this meeting. So let's introduce the first speaker. Kat Kenyon is the chair of Haringey Living Streets. Living Streets is a national organisation promoting walking and cycling, and there are currently 10 Healthy Streets groups in Haringey, Stroud Green being one of them. Kat is also a member of Healthy Streets in St Anne's, which is one of the 3 LTNs that will be delivered by Haringey in 2021. Kat, over to you.
Thanks very much, Louise, and thanks very much to the group for having me. I'm going to attempt to share my screen in a minute and just go through a couple of slides. So let me just bring that up now. Okay, can you see my screen? Good. Okay, I can see some thumbs up. So yeah, as Louise mentioned, I am a chair of Haringey Living Streets. So I'm a resident in St Anne's Ward. I've lived here for 8 years, but I grew up in Finsbury Park, so not too far away. I set up Haringey Living Streets with a couple of other residents who felt really strongly that they wanted to see change in the community. And since we kind of established that core group, as Louise mentioned, there's been a kind of establishment of lots of ward level groups, which has been really fantastic to see. As Louise mentioned, we're part of the Living Streets national charity. So that's a charity that works to support everyday walking in local communities. It's a charity that campaigned for some of the first pedestrian crossings in the country and also speed limits in urban areas. And essentially Living Streets, kind of a core element of our work is looking at how we can create a new vision for our towns and cities which are orientated around people and not just motor traffic. And that's really within the context of increasing levels of traffic that we are seeing on our roads across the UK. So there's a kind of key stat we often share, which is that kind of over the last 50 years. Oh, sorry, there's a cat fight. I'm sorry if you can hear 2 cats fighting in my garden, sorry. Yeah, there's been this increase over the last 50 years from 13 million car journeys to 38 million car journeys, and that's something that's very concerning and impacts us in lots of ways. So when we established the group, there were a couple of key areas that we knew we wanted to tackle in the creation of Healthy Streets. So the first one was climate emergency. So when we established the group, it was around the same time as Haringey, the borough, announced a climate emergency. And we were conscious that 26% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions come from transport, and the main sources being petrol and diesel cars. The second point was on air pollution. So as Louise already mentioned, this stat on the kind of every year air pollution causing 36,000 deaths in the UK. And we know in UK cities that vehicles produce more air pollution than any single human activity, other single human activity. The third point was on social justice. So actually we realised lots of people weren't that familiar with these stats, but actually 52% of households in Haringey don't have access to a car. And so we really wanted to start talking about how are those residents moving around our streets and what are their experiences at the moment. We also know that car ownership is lower in less affluent areas of our communities, and yet those in more socially deprived areas are more likely to experience some of the negative impacts of car use in terms of road casualties and also in terms of air pollution. More recently, there's also been discussions about the COVID-19 response. So in Haringey, nearly 2/3 of residents who travel to work do so on public transport, and that's actually incredibly high level if you look at national rates. So it's the 3rd highest rate of public transport use in the UK. And so we were very conscious as a group as kind of numbers of people on public transport was being restricted to enable social distancing. The discussion was, how will Haringey residents get to work? And we knew we needed to avoid a car boom, and actually what could we do to enable those who maybe wanted to walk and cycle more to make those journeys in those ways rather than all piling into cars. And then just the final point as well about an inactivity crisis. So children in the UK spending kind of only 68 minutes outside on average a day, and looking at how we can change our street design to enable more children to use our streets independently, to encourage more street play, to see, you know, every child in Haringey having a safe cycle route to their secondary school or primary school, in fact. Okay. So I just had a couple of slides just to illustrate those points. So this is just some data looking at the Office of National Statistics census data on car ownership. So this shows percentage of households with no car or van by tenure. And you can see in red you have stats for England, in green for London, and then the kind of dark purple colour is for Haringey. And what you can see is that those who are in socially rented houses, there's a much higher percentage of people in socially rented houses who have no car or van. So yeah, just illustrating that earlier point. And this is just a point on road casualties. So there's a table here. Sorry, it's probably a bit too much content for a slideshow, but it's essentially, it was a mapping done by some residents of road casualties. It was using data from 2018 to 2019. And our members of our group mapped numbers of injury collisions per ward. And what we saw was that there was a much higher rate of collisions in some of the wards in more deprived areas of Haringey, further to the east, so in areas like Tottenham Green, Bruce Grove, and actually much lower levels of collisions in some of the more affluent areas. And that's absolutely kind of reflecting data shown nationally on the impact of road casualties in more deprived areas. Okay, so my next slide is just a picture from Amsterdam, and I guess I wanted to show this because often when we talk about healthy streets and we talk about, you know, what's been achieved in the Netherlands, people are like, but it's always been like that, and it can never be like that where we are because it's completely different. And I guess I just wanted to show this contrast of a street in Amsterdam in 1978 versus 2005 to show that it wasn't always like that in Amsterdam, and it was actually, you know, a conscious decision to redesign streets and to create them to be more people friendly, and that's something that we can absolutely do in Haringey. I also just wanted to say that, I mean, a core focus for our group, you know, we're conscious that some people are absolutely, you know, reliant on cars, and particularly for longer journeys, cars or public transport and maybe more appropriate. But one of the things we really wanted to target was short car journeys. So we know that kind of 40% of urban journeys are for 2 miles and under, and actually a lot of those journeys could be made on foot or by bike or by scooting. So what could we be doing to support people to make that shift and make more of those short car journeys by alternative means? I'm just going to briefly go through, there were 5 asks that Haringey Living Streets established that we think are really central to that shift, and we created this list with the Haringey Cycling Campaign as well. So the first one is on creating safe routes for all ages and abilities to travel around the borough by a network of protected cycle routes. So these are some examples of what cycling infrastructure looks like in Haringey at the moment, and we would say that this is an infrastructure that enables people who are maybe concerned about cycling not feeling safe. It's not an inclusive design. There's a kind of a Dutch approach of supporting, they talk about the kind of 8 to 80-year-old model. So does your cycle infrastructure enable people within that age range to feel comfortable to cycle independently? And so these are some examples of the types of cycling infrastructure that we would really like to see across Haringey. Okay, the next point is on walking infrastructure, which is obviously very close to Haringey Living Streets hearts. But this was on you know, creating better walking networks across the borough. This is an example. This is one of my neighbours on Hermitage Road, and as you can see here, we have a real issue in terms of pavement parking. So this pavement parking on was actually quite a wide road, means that somebody with a double buggy or somebody in a mobility scooter cannot travel down their own pavement, but is instead forced to walk on the main road instead. We also want to see improvements of pedestrian crossings, so crossings where people need to cross with timings which enable them to get across the road without rushing. So yeah, really important to think about how we can improve that walking infrastructure. The next key point, an ask of our groups, is on establishing low traffic neighbourhoods and school streets across the borough. So that's responding to the increase in backstreet traffic levels, and lots of people have talked about the kind of impact of things like Waze and Uber in encouraging people to take shortcuts down residential roads. So I think kind of, again, one of the kind of key stats here is shared is basically a doubling of traffic on residential roads over the last 10 years. And really this idea of kind of turning commuter streets back into community streets, and for school streets in particular, creating safe spaces in and around the school gates. And just on the point on the low traffic neighbourhoods, so just to say that this is I can send it in the chat function, but there's a really fantastic tool from TfL called their strategic network analysis. This is a slightly pixelated picture from Haringey, but it shows basically they do a scoring mechanism looking at lots of factors in different communities which show how low traffic neighbourhoods could be of benefit to them. So it looks at things like levels of through traffic per ward, levels of car ownership, levels of deprivation, numbers of schools in the ward, and the dark green colours show areas that have scored very, very highly in terms of applicability for low traffic neighbourhoods, but all areas you know, would be of benefit too. But yeah, just for your reference, that resource is there. Okay, and then just finally, our last two asks. So there's one on Vision Zero, so really important that we're reducing road casualties across Haringey and enforcing speed limits and making sure that our streets are safe. And that Vision Zero is about getting that casualty level down to 0. And then a final point about kind of reducing the number of car parking spaces across the borough and making sure that space is reallocated to 24-hour bus lanes on our main roads, for example, to walking and cycling infrastructure, or also things like parklets and urban greening. We're not talking about taking away all parking spaces, but actually just a fairer reallocation of some of that space to other uses. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch on the fact, so Louise mentioned that we've had these kind of 10 groups form across the borough. We thought it was really important when we set up Haringey Living Streets to have real local ownership over local plans. And so we really encourage these ward level groups to establish and to bring their communities together to talk about the changes they wanted to see, which is exactly what you're doing here. And it's really encouraging to see so many people turn up. These are some images from a community meeting, which was still allowed at this point in St Anne's ward, and I think just to say kind of some of the successes that I've heard from other groups, so I think exactly what you've been doing in terms of really good outreach, so making sure you have representatives from across the community coming to events. I'd say it shouldn't just be kind of side road focused, you should have reps from your main roads, your side roads, from businesses, from schools, health providers, kind of all elements of the community coming together and creating a better vision for their streets. And also, yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're finding with our groups is, you know, we are pleased that Haringey Council has committed to, for example, a network of cycle lanes across the borough and also LTMs across the borough, but we are conscious that they probably, you know, can't go in realistically all at the same time. So we're really keen to encourage these first LTNs to go in and then to support others to go in, as well as the wider infrastructure we need to see to our street space. I've probably gone wildly over time, but just to say the last final points, I just wanted to update on what's happening across Haringey in terms of action from the council. So there have been campaign groups lobbying for years and years for change with very little change that we've seen on the ground, but it feels like things are starting to move, and these are just some of the big changes I just wanted to briefly highlight to you. So the first one is this 3 successful low traffic neighbourhood bids with funding available from TfL. The second one is a walking and cycling action plan that's just gone, it's about to go out for consultation. And as I just mentioned, that there is a commitment there for a borough-wide protected cycle network and for LTNs across the entire borough. There's also been a commitment of a £5.1 million to support walking and cycling interventions, and we've been really trying to push the council to look at how that money can be spent on main road improvements alongside the LTNs. And then also there's been a commitment for 20 school streets to be delivered by the end of the Easter holidays, although we're not entirely convinced that all 20 will be delivered, but we'll see. We had quite a lot of catching up to do. And then just finally, I guess I just wanted to say that I think this is a very potentially quite a big moment for Haringey, and it's within a wider context, which I'm sure Sarah's going to touch on, of a significant shift in terms of the Healthy Streets movement and change really happening. And I think this is the time for communities to come together and to talk about creating something better in our communities. So yeah, that's, I think, it for me.
Kat, just very briefly, to sort of precis some of the debate in the chat window, it'd be great for 30 seconds on what's the story around what happens to boundary roads? What, if any, evidence do we have around pollution data? And do you think this is anti-car?
Okay. Yeah, hold on. So I'll take the last one first. So whether it's anti-car, so I think that there is an issue with too much car use, and I think, you know, TfL reflected that even a slight increase in car use across our boroughs would just lead to complete congestion on our streets, and that doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit the people who really rely on cars for mobility reasons. It means they're stuck in traffic and can't get to where they need to, and it means, you know, people who could be benefiting from more walking and cycling aren't able to because there's no safe space to do that. So for me, it's about a fairer reallocation, remembering that majority of residents who don't have access to a car, and thinking about how we can make that better. I think also it's really important to bring car owners into the discussion and to talk about the changes they want to see too. But I think that's how I would frame it. I think on the point on boundary roads, so I mean, what I've tried to illustrate in this presentation is that this wasn't a presentation just about LTNs, it's about healthy streets. And actually we would say, actually I can share it now. There was also, wanted to say, like, as part of our core campaigning, we have key suggestions of things that you can be doing on main roads too. So as far as I'm concerned, you need action on side roads and main roads to create healthy streets. They're both very important. And these are kind of a selection of interventions that we would absolutely support on main roads at the same time, and think they're very important. I mean, at the same time, I'd say, you know, there's I think the key reflection from LTNs is that there is often, when they're first put in place, there is a period of adjustment, where, you know, we do absolutely sometimes see congestion on main roads, but it tends over the long period to level out, and that's certainly reflected in some of the latest data we saw from St Peter's, and evidence from Morecambe Forest too. But I'd say it needs to be monitored really carefully. I think air quality monitoring needs to be in place for any of these schemes, and really important to track that and to show the benefit that they can have for the whole community over longer periods of time. But I'm sure that Sarah might have reflections to add to that too, as well as other members on the call.
Sounds like a great segue to you, Sarah, then.
Great, I'll come in now. And I do have some stuff on boundary roads too. So thanks everyone for having me. I am not a Haringey local, I will say that at the outset. However, when I first moved to London 5 years ago, I did live on Rosebery Gardens, just off Green Lanes, and have a lot of affection for that part of the world. And I'm really excited to hear that walking and cycling around there is going to get better. My boyfriend at the time, he used to come and visit me, visited on a bike, and at the time I didn't cycle, and I remember just thinking that, like, he was taking his life into his own hands every time he cycled off away from me. I know past me would have felt much better about all of this. But I'm coming from Lambeth, where we had we had 5 LTNs installed 9 months ago. So I'm coming to talk to you about what this looks like a little bit of the ways down the road, when things have sort of calmed down, when all of the sat navs are up to date, when people are used to the changes, and when things have settled. And I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about the things that aren't related to transport. I think, you know, because LTNs are installed by transport departments, we often make the mistake of talking about this in terms of what it means for drivers and what it means for cyclists and what it means for pedestrians. But regardless of how you get around, this is going to impact your life. And it's going to impact your life in ways that are much, much broader than just how you get around. And I think that that's something that's often missed from the conversation, which is a real shame, because to me, that's some of the best things that the LTNs have to offer. So this is Railton low traffic neighbourhood. This was the low traffic neighbourhood that was most local to me. If you'll see the sort of road that's Railton Road, the long one sort of at the northern side of this map, you can see that it's got 3 filters along it, and one on a cross-section road that's Shakespeare Road as well. In terms of technicalities, if people are into the specifics of the LTN, ours is an ANPR system, which means that the roads, while they have planters on them and road signs that say you can't go through here, the roads themselves aren't physically blocked off. They're enforced by cameras, number plate recognition cameras instead. The reason for that is when our council consulted with local emergency services weren't comfortable in the geography of the area of that road being closed off. So the local council worked with them to make it in a way that enabled them to still get around as they needed. Other councils have talked to emergency services, which is a mandatory part of this process, and they have found that the closure of those roads won't be a problem. So in our neighbouring Southwark, the roads themselves and entire sections of roads are closed off, rather than just a sort of, if you drive through here and ignore these signs, you'll get a fine, which is what we've got in Railton Low Traffic Neighbourhood. And I want to talk to you today, I'm going to start off with the data on how things have changed. So this monitoring data was released a couple of weeks ago from Lambeth Council. It has been looked at, and it's been, smarter people than me have looked at this and adjusted for COVID and adjusted for the fact that because this was during a lockdown, there were going to be changes in how many people were on the roads. But this is, and for all those people in the chat that are asking, like, what happens to boundary roads and what happens to this is the part of the presentation to listen to, because this is the part with the data on what happens to boundary roads. So on Railton Road, the road that had the filters, car journeys have gone down by 75% in the 9 months since the filters were introduced, and bicycle journeys have gone up by a similar percentage. In terms of cars and heavy goods vehicles, there was a real worry in our local area because there was a waste management facility on one of the boundary roads, that there would be an increase in HGVs or heavy good vehicles on those roads. That has also gone down. If you look at the boundary roads and the LTN inside the LTN together, traffic has gone down by 31%. But if you look at the last paragraph, the car journeys on the periphery of our low traffic neighbourhood on the boundary roads have also gone down by 21%, along with a 14% reduction in HGV. There's also been a 17% increase in cycle journeys on periphery roads. So this is not just showing that the traffic has gone down within the LTN, it's gone down on the roads that people thought that traffic would increase as well. The reason for that is the fact that there has been a significant modal shift. All evidence is pointing to that in our area, that people are using bikes more, people are walking more, and it's becoming more pleasurable to do so. And that has been a really positive thing to see. That being said, our local council hasn't been happy with the level of traffic decrease on those boundary roads. So there are additional measures that are going in order to make sure that number continues to go down. So they're installing more bike storage, making more 24-hour bus lanes and all different things along those lines. So in terms of the raw numbers, that has been the result. And they're there for you to look at and for you to think about. What I want to talk to you about now is what that has meant for the neighbourhood, starting at a personal level for me, but also more broadly for Lambeth in general. So this is me the day that I got my letter saying that a low traffic neighbourhood was coming in. I'd never ridden a bike in London before. I only learnt to ride a bike about a year and a half, 2 years before this picture was taken. But I sort of said to myself, if I'm not going to learn how to ride a bike now, when the government is literally telling me stay off public transport, which was my main form of getting around London, and trying to make it safer for people like me to use a bike, then it was never going to happen. So I went and bought one. I bought a pink bike. I bought a helmet to match, and for me, it's completely changed my life. It's now my main form of transportation around London. I've cycled, 12 miles out to the Thames Barrier Park. I've cycled out to Kingston. I've cycled into central London plenty of times. I'm still a terrible cyclist. I still fall off my bike loads. I still can't signal properly. But I found that the changes that happened made me feel like something that I never thought someone like me, like a clumsy, overweight, sort of risk averse, terrified, anxious woman would ever be able to do. It's really opened it up for me on a personal level. It's also something that the community has come together to sort of support. So if you walk around Railton low traffic neighbourhood, even now, 9 months on, you'll still see a lot of these posters up in people's walls and people's windows. It was something that everyone came together and sort of designed and downloaded and painted and put up in display, especially when kids were strapped for things to do in the first lockdown. You might have seen this sign around London. This was something that we designed in the community as well, to represent that this, all the road closed signs that we were seeing up and about to us didn't really speak to what these schemes were about, because it wasn't closed to drivers. It was open to people who were walking or cycling their kids to school, people who were scooting, people on mobility scooters or wheelchair users who now felt safe to wheel around on the road rather than navigating bins and tree roots and different things on the pavements. It was open to people who were walking their dogs. It was open to people who were going for runs. and a bit more positive messaging. And this started in Lambeth, but has spread all across the country and recently to New Zealand and Australia as well, who have installed similar schemes there. We adapted our planters, so we have a lot of local people who are much handier than me. This is not something that I would be able to do on my own. The planter that you see here was installed by Father Nature, who was the company that was commissioned by Lambeth Council. But that little seat that you can see there was installed by a member of the community who realised that while we had these sort of planters there, and there were nice places to lean on, there weren't really anywhere to sit down and to have a chat. So in consultation with a lot of businesses on Railton Road, there was a butcher in particular who was like, love these planters, but I wish I could sit there and have my coffee in the morning. So they adapted it by installing seats and installing a little coffee rest so that they could sit there before work, have a drink, have a coffee, chat to people as they were walking by on their break, and have that sort of space to relax. You'll see here, this little boy is 4 years old, and this is his first time ever being allowed to ride his bike on the road. And you can sort of see the happiness and the joy in his face that has come from that. This was the day after a local activist group painted the road within some of the filters to sort of again signify the change in space and the idea that this was open to people and not just a space to move cars around anymore. This has actually been replicated in different LTNs within Lambeth, and my favourite part of it is that a local school has even decorated their playground tarmac to match one of the designs within the LTN to continue that message of these are spaces that are open to everyone for children to play and explore and be independent rather than somewhere that they need to be sort of afraid of cars. Here's another thing that has been installed. This is and I should update this picture actually because it's now got, it now looks a lot better than this, but this is a parklet that was installed out the front of one of the off licenses on Railton Road and one of the more sort of beloved businesses in the area. It's now got, you can see where the gentleman is sitting, if you look underneath his arm that's on the fence, you can see some sort of like diagonal wood there. That's a hidden marble run that was put in by a volunteer. And there's also been the addition of a hand-painted chessboard by a 12-year-old girl who lives across the road, who's an aspiring artist, and the addition of a 30-centimetre high toddler chair after feedback from local children that the seats were too high and they couldn't get up onto them. It's now filled out with plants that are going to be climbing plants that sort of go up those trellises. And a conversation with this gentleman that I found really interesting was him saying that all of Railton Road, as much as it was quieter without the traffic, there still wasn't really anywhere to sit down. That for a lot of the stretch, there were no benches and nowhere for him to sort of sit and relax. And now that this parklet was installed, it meant that it was possible for him to be able to sort of walk to the local off license, knowing that he could have a rest partway through the journey. And for me, you know, as someone who, you know, doesn't have any mobility disability and tends to be able to make those journeys without getting fatigued, I'd never thought about the fact that it's really important to be able to have seats and somewhere to sit down if you're someone who, you know, is battling with a mobility disability or does get a little bit tired on those longer journeys. So the simple fact of adding these seats in, you know, really gave that added independence for someone who otherwise would have been dependent on someone else being able to drive him around the shops, and now he can do that on his own. And this is one of my favourite ones. This was part of Tulse Hill LTN's Christmas celebration. They organised a community scavenger hunt set around that 12 Days of Christmas song, the one that has the like 5 golden rings line in it. This is the partridge in a pear tree made out of paper mache that a group of local volunteers set up to organise when Christmas was a bit bleak, because everyone can remember we weren't really allowed to do much or go anywhere or see anyone. And they set up a themed hunt around the LTN in all of the different planters for kids to go on with their families and be able to explore. And this is my favourite LTN moment so far. I've tried purposely not to focus too much on the transportation elements of what an LTN can offer, but more on what an LTN can sort of give you if you enable this sort of community space to come about. Just shared my screen again so you'll get sound, but I stumbled across this one day when I was going for my sort of daily exercise walk in the LTN and just thought it really captured everything that I love about it. So here you go.
I'm gonna try.
you'll see in that moment that there's you know, the thing I love about that is there's still someone on a car that's getting around because that's their preferred way of doing so, and that's fine, and that's still allowed in the LTN. But there are also people that are riding their bike. There are people on the side of the road who have stopped on their walk. There are runners who are able to move into the middle of the road and get around the sort of busy sidewalk. And there are people on their bikes who have been able to sort of stop and enjoy what they're seeing and enjoy the singing. And I just remember watching it and thinking, if everyone was getting around by cars here, there would be someone at the back who was honking their horn and getting really annoyed and trying to go ahead. And this really made space for community to thrive and a different sort of experience to be had on our streets. So that's what we've had here in Lambeth, and I'm really hoping that something similar will happen in Haringey. And thanks for having me here to talk about what it's been like.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks, Kat. They were both brilliant presentations. There's a few questions in the chat. The first one is about kind of NIMBYs. Aren't we all NIMBYs wanting kind of to reduce traffic in our streets? Would anybody like to take that? And Sarah, that was such a joyous way to end that presentation. That just really made me smile. There are so many ways our roads could be used, and right now they're very dominated. And let's just remind ourselves, 50% of traffic is from out of borough, it's cutting through. And 99% of the traffic coming down Lancaster Road or up at Tollington is just cutting through. It's not local traffic, a lot of it. So yeah. So would anybody like to respond to someone's question about us being NIMBYs? Yeah,
I can jump in on that. So when the first, I've moved since the LTNs went in, and while I lived within Railton LTN when it first went in, I now live on the boundary roads of Tulse Hill LTN on a main road in town. And you know, it's a road that is still used to move a load of cars around, but you know, I still walk to the shops. I still go to the, like, if I was catching public transportation at the moment, my journey to the train station, my journey to the park, my journey to the shops, my journey to see friends and family, all of those things are still through the LTN. And it's really beneficial to everyone to be able to get around their communities by being able to navigate through these. So, you know, this is going to be, hopefully, if you read the government's reports on where they want to be by 2030, 2040, 2050, this is just the start of a thing that's going to be happening all across the country, and already is. I think it's something like 70 LTNs have gone in since the start of the pandemic, and now 10% of Londoners live within a couple of minutes walk of one. So it is something that is getting open to more and more people. You know, would I like, it just feels like something that's worthwhile having everywhere. And yeah, you know, like, I obviously, the road that I live on now is busier than the road I lived on when I lived within the LTN, but I'm still just as thankful that LTN is there, because it does make my life better, whether or not it's my immediate backyard or a few minutes walk away.
And I think the point is we have to reduce traffic overall. We have to reduce traffic for people in neighbourhoods and on our boundary roads because of climate change and because of air pollution. You know, we have to remember this is a huge public health issue. So the status quo isn't okay. So we're not seeking to push traffic anywhere else. We're seeking to reduce traffic overall. There's another question about age, and some older people can't actually cycle and walk and need their cars. Kat, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I can. I also just want to maybe just pick up on a trend I'm seeing on the chat, just if it's all right. I just want to clarify the LTNs that have been funded in Haringey. So there isn't an LTN funded for Stroud Green. So at the moment, the three schemes, there's one in Bounds Green, there's one in Bruce Grove, and there's one in St Anne's. So at the moment, there's no funding for Stroud Green. The council have said in this walking and cycling plan that's gone out that they would like to see LTNs across the borough. But just to say that, yeah, there isn't a scheme yet for Stroud Green, but you know, there is local support built up to ask for one and to design it and to pressure the council to make sure there's a significant budget. I think it sounds like some people think there's already a scheme going in and a plan for an LTN in Stroud Green. Just to say there isn't yet, but it is something that could be supported by the local community. The point on kind of more elderly members of the community not being able to cycle. So somebody was telling me a stat the other day about I think it's women over the age of 60 in the Netherlands, more of them cycle than men under 21 or something. I will share the stat afterwards, but just to say that there are absolutely members of the community who are in the older bracket who can cycle, but I totally appreciate not everyone would want to or is able to. And I think it just goes back to this point that it's about making sure that there is road space for those who do need to drive, that they're not stuck in traffic all the time because everybody's trying to drive, for those who are reliant on cars, that they have the space that they need to. But again, just back to the point that then we're also providing safe alternatives for people who would like to travel through other means.
I think in this lockdown has been very different from the last lockdown, and as predicted, many more people are taking to their cars. But as you said, Kat, 2/3 of the borough do not own a car and travel by public transport. So what if all those people came off public transport and into cars? You know, we're already gridlocked. It can't get worse than this. Well, it could actually. But so, you know, something has to change. So also there was kind of a point about, are we just making all generalizations? Can you say something about kind of the evidence-based work that's coming out of places of low traffic neighbourhoods like Railton and St Peter's in Islington? Sarah, would you like to start? Because I think people are a bit concerned that we're not evidence-based.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually just responding to some of these questions in the chat, and I'm just popping in some of the like research reports and different, you know, peer-reviewed research papers that have gone into this. A lot of these LTNs that have come in recently, a lot of those 70 that I've talked about, right, they're all new, they're all within the last year, but they're not the first ones that have gone in the UK. They're not the first ones that have gone in London. That's happened in Waltham Forest. They're not the first ones to have gone in the UK. There's been plenty all over, including some from Newcastle that were like incredibly controversial when they first went in. There was a story I read recently where there was a man who was sure that the LTN going in Newcastle in his community was going to be terrible, and he launched a petition against it, and he marched against it and had, you know, photographed with signs saying how much he hated the idea. And he was interviewed by The Guardian a few years later down the track, and the headline of the story from him was, "I was wrong. I actually had to buy extra store space in the shop next door because I expanded my business because I've had an increase in customers since these changes have come into effect." You know, and that's just looking at the evidence that we've seen in the UK. If you actually look abroad at other countries who have done measures like this, they're seeing the same evidence as well. A lot of people will have heard of the idea that if you build an extra lane of traffic, more cars will come to fill it. It's the same reason why, you know, it doesn't matter how many roads we build, it doesn't matter how many lanes we put on the roads that we use to get around the country, it always seems to be congested and there always appears to be traffic there. The same thing works in reverse. When you take those lanes of traffic away, then less people use their cars, in the same way that people are like, well, there's that extra lane, I'm going to go and I'm going to do that, take that journey. And it sounds crazy and it sounds like magic and it sounds like something that doesn't make any sense, but it is good practice transport design, and it is good practice urban design now, and it's going to be the trend not only in London but all across the world, because it's what we're coming to learn about how traffic moves. And as we're in this situation when, you know, we're facing this climate crisis and air pollution is just shocking. I don't know if anyone else has use that new tool that's come out in the last couple of days that allows you to put in your address and it tells you whether or not you're over the WHO guidelines for air pollution. My address certainly is. The only way that we're going to fix that problem is by finding ways to encourage people to drive less. And there's a whole bunch of ways you can do that. One of them is you can make people pay more to drive. And, you know, that's something that's going to be coming towards the end of the year. Towards the end of the year, you know, if you've got an old polluting vehicle, you're going to have to pay £12 a day to drive it. That's just going to be a reality. There's this other way, which is, well, we're going to make it nicer to do all of the other means that you can get around. We're going to make bus journeys quicker and easier. We're going to make walking and cycling more joyful. In the end, we're going to need carrots and sticks, but you know, at the end of the day, the answer is really clear that we just need to find ways to get people to get around out of their cars unless they need those cars to get around. And, you know, for me, I don't want it to be in a situation where it's only the wealthy that can afford to drive. I want it to be a situation where only those who need to drive feel like that's the best way for them to get around. That, to me, feels fairer.
So there's also a question about children, and you know, children can't be at this meeting tonight, but they should have a voice in all of this. You know, when I was a child, I played in my street all day, every day, but children are now absent from our streets. And you had that stat, Kat, about them only spending 80 minutes a day outside. Could you say a little bit more about children and cycling and how we can make that safe for them? Because I know every time my 16-year-old son goes out, he gets, you know, near passes, like abuse hurled at him from adults because he's slowing them down. We've got huge speeding issue through Stroud Green. Could you just talk about children and young people and helping them cycle to school or walk to school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would, so many of the conversations with schools and children about traffic have mainly been about road safety and essentially telling kids how dangerous roads are and to avoid them. And parents have become increasingly concerned about their children using streets in an independent way. So, you know, I think it was like 20 years ago, the majority of children were still walking to school independently, and it is now less than 50%. And it's you know, I would love our conversations to schools, not just about, you know, teaching children about road safety, but actually saying to them, what is your walk or cycle to school like at the moment, and what would make it better? And how, you know, that point earlier I made about cycling to secondary schools. So I think most people are generally fine for like a 5-year-old cycling on the pavement. That's kind of seen as socially acceptable. But the moment you get a little bit older than that, and you become, you know, a teenager, people are not happy for people to be cycling on the pavements. But the reality is, I think most of us probably wouldn't be happy with our kids cycling on Haringey's roads as they are at the moment. So how can we create safe roads to cycling routes to all of our secondary schools, so that kids have that option for independent travel? So I think you know, and yes, a very good point about cargo bikes for families as a transport mode for moving children around too. So I'd say that's really important. And just to build on the earlier point, so Sarah gave an excellent example of the array of LTMs that are there both in the UK and beyond and historically, but also to say there are some already in our community. So it's somebody mentioned in the chat, obviously the one in Finsbury Park, I grew up on Finsbury Park Road, which was filtered since I think the 70s, and you know, is been long established. And we've also got filters in the gardens along green lanes, and those are creating, you know, safe walking and cycling routes for the communities there to get onto green lanes, and it's very much about kind of building on that existing network.
Thank you both. I'm afraid we're going to have to move on, although you know, it'd be lovely to speak to you both for longer. So you're welcome to stay, or you know, you've probably got your families to go to as well, but you're welcome to stay. We're going to have a quick update on what we've been doing in Stroud Green, and then we're going to go into groups and chat as neighbours. Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you so much, Sarah. And you're doing amazing work to try and clean up, make our streets more healthy. For our children's futures. Thank you.
Great.
So
yeah, hi everyone. It's Nick Hedges here, part of Healthy Stroud Green organisation, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about who we are, why we came together, and what we've been doing. I've got some slides which hopefully I'm going to share with you. But before I go into the actual slides, I would just like to say again, you know, thank you to Sarah and Catherine. It was really great and really encouraging to hear your stories about how you've created LTNs and made them a huge success, and how they are not just about reducing traffic, but creating thriving communities. Yeah. Great inspiring stories and really positive stories to see the impact that they can make for the community. So yeah, Healthy Stroud Green, just a group of local residents that really came together in the summer of 2020 and united by I suppose a common set of desires and beliefs, and I don't think it was an accident that we came together during the pandemic. I think partly the lockdown and closing traffic, the reduction of pollution over that time really brought home how positive and healthy the local neighbourhood could be when traffic is reduced. It was a remarkable difference. More people cycling, more people walking, nature was there, the birds were in the trees, people were gathering in open spaces more. It was such a different environment, a more pleasant place to be. And we wanted that to be not just a temporary change, but a more permanent part of the neighbourhood. And I think the other thing that brought us together was just a general awareness of the global climate emergency, and a desire to do more within our local community. So yes, we got together in summer of last year, and since then we've been extremely busy. So I just wanted to share some highlights of what we've been doing. First of all, it's really important, and we wanted to engage with the local community and speak on behalf of the neighbourhood, and been doing a huge amount of outreach to try and communicate and engage with as many people as possible. Louise mentioned the door knocking and engaging the community through speaking to them on the doorsteps. It's been hard, to be honest, while the pandemic has been going on because of social distancing, but we've made a lot of efforts to actually knock on everybody's door, to speak to local businesses, to put posters up, to try to raise awareness of the issues, and to encourage people to get involved with the organisation. We've also been lobbying local councillors, so we've had some really great traction with our local councillors. They actually were able to attend the last meeting that we had. Unfortunately, they weren't able to attend this meeting. They are very supportive of what we're doing. Unfortunately, the timing of this meeting clashed with a general council meeting, so they had a clash of diaries and weren't able to attend. But generally, they are hugely supportive of the organisation, and they see it as a good way to tap into the sentiment of what's happening in the neighbourhood and the opinions of people that live locally. I mentioned the last meeting we had, so I'm not sure if everyone was able to attend that, but it was back in October the 8th last year. And for our first session, it was a really good, positive session. So we got 40 local residents, we had 3 councillors there, and there was a really great discussion. For me, it was amazing. There were some key points that I took away from it. One was the amazing sense of pride that people had living in Stroud Green. People had been living here, their whole lives. People had just moved in, but they were incredibly positive about the area and a desire to do to really invest in it and make the community grow. There was also a unanimous consensus that the level of traffic locally was far too high. The pollution was far too high. They felt that it was being used very much as a cut through from other neighbourhood areas in the surrounding areas, such as Green Lanes, over in Islington, and really, a lot of the noise and the pollution wasn't being driven by local people. And the final thing that came out of that meeting was a real good consensus that people wanted the council to do more. There was a real frustration at the time that not enough was being done, and that Haringey was falling behind other boroughs in the area, neighbourhood boroughs like Hackney, like Islington, and a real frustration that we wanted to see more done. So we had the meeting, we got some great feedback. We had an 8-page report off the back of it, which we sent to the councillors involved to really try and communicate the sentiment of the neighbourhood. We've also created a website. So I gather the fact that you guys are here, you've been to the website, you've seen that, but that gives us a great platform to communicate what's happening, events that we're running, and to continue that engagement. We've also been doing residents and business surveys. So the resident survey you can access via our website. 70 people have already taken part. The image down there in the bottom right is a highlight of some of the information we've collected. And again, you can see an overwhelming consensus that there's real concern about the level of traffic in Stroud Green, and a desire to reduce it and improve things like cycling safety, pedestrian safety. So really positive work there. The other thing that we're doing is we have some specific campaigns that we're running to sort of improve the environment for the local community. And first of all, it's really around that low traffic neighborhood. And when we came together as an organization, it was a real desire for us to deliver that. But what's helped dramatically is Haringey Council's walking and cycling action plan that Catherine mentioned in her session. That really gives us something to focus our efforts on and speak to the local council about. And as Catherine mentioned, the council has a very comprehensive plan. It's really far-reaching. It's very visionary. It spans a number of years, and it really sets out Haringey's ambition to become a leader in health and safety, transportation, active walking, active cycling, and a healthy, greener community. Part of that is low traffic neighbourhoods, and as Catherine mentioned, Haringey have already secured funding for 3 of those, but what we want to do is make sure that Stroud Green is really prioritised, and that it gets into the next tranche of funding to be a low traffic neighbourhood in the near future. We're also aware that it's not just about reducing traffic, it's about creating a more positive community, a thriving community. And we work very closely with a number of different organisations to do that. And one of those is Guardians of the Green. And I'm delighted that we have a member of the Guardians on today's call. And Beth, I don't know if you want to say a few words about the work that you do, particularly around making the boundary roads greener and opening up the public spaces.
Yeah, sure. So Jasmine, who's a neighbour of mine, we started the Guardians of the Green together. And the idea is we just saw so many of our public spaces were quite neglected. And we understand budgets from Haringey over the last 10 years have been cut, and money is sent elsewhere. There's other priorities, but we kind of felt that for quite a few reasons, our public shared spaces are really important. One, for reducing pollution, but also for making safe spaces for communities to come together. And we kind of felt that our community was quite segregated. Everybody's busy, everybody's out at work. So if we could create some of these lovely little pockets and put on community events where people feel they're involved, it can only be beneficial. So we started our little gardening project, probably 1.5 years ago. And we advertised it by putting posters around the area and putting stuff on social media. And I think our first gardening session, we had 15 people turned up, and unfortunately we spent most of that time clearing rubbish. So we started our gardening project on the corner of Upper Tollington Park and Stroud Green Road. It's actually called Charter Court, and they were just left full of beer cans and much worse than beer cans. So we cleared that up. And since then, we've had probably about 8 or 9 gardening sessions, and we've had a fantastic public response. Plants donated, people of all ages getting involved. Our councillors have come down and helped us, and it's started to. I'd like to say it has transformed the area, but it's started to transform the area. But what we really noticed was the amount of people that would come and sit just because they wanted connection. There was quite a few people that were not able-bodied enough to feel they could get involved with the gardening, but they wanted to come and sit with us, and they'd spend 3 or 4 hours chatting. And so we really started thinking how we should try and create these public spaces in any pockets that we could find in our area that were unloved. So our next project is we want to start at the bottom of Florence Road on the corner of Upper Tollington, where you go up into Parkland Walk. There's an area there that's been left and neglected. So we'd like to take that over. And anybody that wants to join us, we desperately need the help. We need, you know, elbow grease, and we need plants donated. And even if you want to just come and chat, you know, it's about building a nicer community. Some of the other things that we would like to get involved with would be school play streets, and maybe helping children learn to grow fruit, vegetables and plants. So we've actually spoken to a few of the schools, and they're very on board with doing all of that. And we'd quite like to, if we get the permission, to maybe do a car-free day on one of our roads, and we could do some cycle proficiency with children and adults, anybody who's not that confident at cycling. And so far the council seem very, very up for that. So if you want to get involved with any of that, please send us an email, because we could do with lots of help. And then our last little project, and I'll wrap it up, is our Shop Local project. And we've been working with Helena Farstad, who is the head of the Stroud Green Traders, trying to promote shopping locally. So, you know, spending your money with your local shops rather than online. And that's not to say that shopping online isn't good. Sometimes people need things delivered. It's about trying to encourage those that can get out locally to spend their money with local shops to do so. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thanks, Beth. And I'm conscious that we've been talking a long time. We're talking about local engagement as well, and we have a session on the breakout groups to get everyone talking. So I've got one final slide, which is just talking about connections. So the other things that we're doing as part of Healthy Stroud Green, and that's connecting with other interest groups in the area. So local schools, doing a lot of great communication with local schools who are interested in reducing traffic in the environment, in the neighbourhood, who are also themselves lobbying the local council on a separate initiative, School Streets, to limit the amount of traffic around schools at the key times when children are being picked up and dropped off in the morning. But one of the other things that we're doing is communicating and working with other local healthy streets and low traffic neighbourhood groups. One of the interesting factors about Stroud Green is that we are on the edge of the borough, and I'm delighted to see that we've got members of the Lower Islington low traffic neighbourhood group tonight on the call, and we're really hopeful that by working together we can encourage the two local councils to work together and come up with a joint solution that makes sure that any initiatives that are put into place in Haringey don't negatively affect Islington, and vice versa, and actually that they complement each other. The other groups are working with Haringey Clean Air Group and the local cycling groups in both Haringey and Islington, and of course Guardians of the Green. But that's just a quick overview of the work that we've done to date, and I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to talk about the breakout groups. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thanks, Nick. So you know, just massive thanks to all the speakers, but also for your patience. So let's kind of get to the crux of it. One of the things through the chat was this sort of, you know, what's the answer? What's it look like? You know, this is the council's to design, but we think as local residents we should influence it. So this broadly is going to take 2 minutes, but hopefully tries to set up some context. So we're here in Finsbury Park. We're a slightly funny geography in that we're sort of sliced halfway through by the railway tracks and the park. We've got Stroud Green Road, we've got Upper Tollington, Stapleton, and then on the other end we've got Seven Sisters. And I suppose if you haven't seen this day to day, at many times our streets look like this, whether it's kind of cut throughs with big lorries, Upper Trollington being a de facto car park, and trying to get to the Finsbury Park and areas of greenery, sort of journeys dominated by cars. I think that's backed up by our pollution data. You know, it highlights exactly what we already know, and this is the best estimates from 2016. Car use has doubled. So, you know, what would a better future look like? That is the fundamental question we should all be asking ourselves. There's no doubt that some of this stuff requires change of behaviour, that there might be some challenges on the way, but fundamentally we should be asking ourselves, what are the streets we want to live in? This isn't about anti-cars. It isn't about dictating to people how they drive to supermarkets or get their shopping. It's about imagining a better community. And the reason you hear this wraparound of what the Guardians of the Green and others are doing is about a better way of living in our neighbourhood. COVID has changed the way we live. So coming back to sort of the basic challenges, I should probably say a group that didn't appear to be too supportive took some screenshots of these materials, edited them judiciously, printed them out, and then sent them around the neighbourhood. So can I apologise for the confusion that has caused, but hopefully you'll see the original material here. The crux of the challenge is that you have north-south traffic coming essentially from green lanes, trying to come south in the morning, going the other way in the evening, that tries to circumvent going down Seven Sisters, that drives a lot of the traffic down Upper Tollington Park. And you have the same sort of issue then with the surrounding streets, be it coming from the north in Haringey or going elsewhere. So whilst this was kind of pre what Haringey Council put out, this sort of reflects what they called as cells, which are areas of streets. And I think the official kind of Haringey, Stroud Green sort of LTN looks at that ABC area with the D area covered by a separate one. And the sort of idea is, how could you keep traffic on main roads and stop some of the through traffic? So to state again, if you live in your house with a car, I have a car, it doesn't mean you can't drive to your house. That is a key principle, and it's a key bit of equality here. So this was the screenshot that I think was taken out of context, and unhelpfully red marks sort of look like you're closing the road. So what we're not saying here is that you stop people driving to their house. What we are saying here is we try and make it a bit harder for the traffic that's not local to use those streets as rat runs. We already have some examples of that in that Florence on the lower end is a one-way and attempts to install a point of control. So the key bit I would take away from this slide here is what is the best way that we could deal with some of the traffic issues and the rat running and I suppose pollution that comes with it, and what are the points of control that are needed. I think that it's fair to say that it's not easy, and indeed having this debate, we can see how tricky the council's job is, and why sort of residential input is valuable, in as much as we don't want to create situations where you displace traffic from one street to another. That's not equitable, and we think there's something to making sure that Islington keeps pace and stays in step here. So there's some other examples that I think other speakers have spoken to as to how you might do that, be it bollards, cameras, and planters. I think the point of the exercise is to get some feedback. So to that end, why don't I try and stop screen sharing, get us into breakout groups. We will try and sort of split it up into perhaps groups of sort of 10 or so. I must say that the debate in the chat has been excellent, albeit a little backwards and forwards. I would just ask that we all maintain that civility and respect for people who are trying to make our community a better place. So give us a few minutes and we'll send you into breakout groups. Thanks.